Hello and welcome to Parking Live, where the curb meets the conversation. I'm Matt Darst.
And I'm Jade, Neville. Today we're joined by Michael Wiktorko, Interim Head of Parking Services at the London Borough of Hackney.
Hackney's parking service handles over 8,000 incoming appeals and hearing appearances every month, each one considered within the timeframes that are set by legislation and recommended by the Secretary of State for Transport.
And they're doing it exceptionally well. Over the past 5 years, Hackney has achieved the highest performance amongst all London councils, with over 76% of all cases going in the council's favour at the London tribunals.
And Michael has been at the center of a major shift in Hackney, including bringing in parking enforcement in-house after a long period of outsourcing, and some neat operational improvements that flowed from that.
And underpinning all of that is the commitment to first-class customer service experience, fair outcomes for all customers, getting things right first time, and continually improving process. Now, today we're going to get into the real-life detail, leadership, operations, and especially technology and data, and how it supports enforcement programs in Hackney itself, how you adopt new tools sensibly, and where Michael sees technology benefiting the sector is what we're going to be discussing today.
Awesome, so let's get into it. Let's rewind a bit, Michael. What pulled you into parking in the first place, and what's kept you in it?
I think the first thing that pulled me in was a pure luck and coincidence. I started my journey many years back as an apprentice, and that program was applying to apprentice for the council, not a specific department. And then out of all those that were there for apprentices, I've landed in parking and stayed ever since. I think what kept me was just the constant challenges, complex puzzles to solve. It just shows it's not just a simple parking as in you just pay and if you don't you get a ticket. There's much more complexity in there, more transport issues, technology, people, all sorts of that sort of drew me in to stay until today and probably for a little bit longer at least. So yeah, I think that's how I would say it.
It's never really just about parking, is it, Michael? I think this is a conversation that me and Matt had when we were looking back at season 1, where we thought we were making a parking podcast, but actually it turned out to be so much more. It turned out to be access, safety, fairness, and even how a place functions in itself. So yeah, it's always that eye-opening experience when you start working in the parking sector that kind of grabs you and keeps you in it for some time. We alluded to in the intro that you've taken a service in-house as part of your role in Hackney. So let's talk about that a little bit more. It's a proper change program, isn't it? I mean, what were the biggest leadership challenges in that transition, and what surprised you during that process?
Yeah, it's been huge. It's been a few years in the making and then took a few more years to sort of really embed. I think the biggest challenge overall for everyone in the team, including myself, was the sort of shift in the workload. It's so much different to manage a contractor and a contract where it's quite easy and not so hands-on, to when you have the full operation in-house and you have to then manage all the moving parts of it, from HR through to payroll and all that, everything that comes in between. So that has been probably the biggest challenge, is just getting adjusted to that new level of workload and a more hands-on approach. I think that's also where the surprise part came in, is just how many things are there to sort of manage and oversee, and how many little things come out of the woodwork that specifically as a local authority before, when we were just on a contract management basis, we didn't see those little bits and bobs that go in the background. So I think that's where the surprise was. But we've overcome, I think, in a lot of these cases quite successfully, learned a lot. So it's still a continuous improvement process to making sure we're doing the best job we possibly can. But yeah, that's the sort of the biggest challenge and a surprise at the same time.
And in many ways, you're dealing with some intangibles, correct? Things like morale and trust. What did you do early on as part of this change to build trust and momentum within your team?
The thing that we had at the forefront was communication. So since the very day one, when we've made the decision to bring it in-house, we had all staff joining in workshops, We set out what the plans are, what the vision is, and then we've opened it up for all the staff across all levels. Literally every single member of staff had the opportunity to feed into the process, explain things that worked, things that didn't work in the past, what's the priority for them. And on the back of that, that's when we kept regular communications with everyone to say, you've raised these issues, we've looked at it, either we fixed it or here are the reasons why we can't fix it or change it to what's being requested. And that started to build that dialogue and that sort of relationship, which then helped us to nurture the right culture, the trust and etc. that was at the forefront of what we're here to deliver. So that's been the main theme. I think what was coming out of that in terms of the culture and the things that we worked to improve it to get it to the place we want it to be was how important are the little things. So small issues when it comes to uniform, like wet weather gear and things like that, which in the grand scheme of all the operation is something very small, but that actually has started to make the biggest difference in terms of the culture. So when staff raised out, we don't have the full wet weather gear and it rains quite often in London. So when we started to say, well, that was an easy fix, we just order more kit, give it out. And then that helped to turn around some of the issues we had with staff and complaints, etc., to sort of resolve those fully. So I think that just showed how those little things made a such big impact on the overall culture and transition with our new ways of working.
It's amazing how what a seemingly small adjustments can make such a big impact. And having been out there in all weathers myself, I can categorically agree with you. They are very important and they should have the due care and attention paid to them just as much as any other big decision that is going to be made. And, we're talking about this at the moment from a leadership lens, but it would be good to actually discuss a little bit more what changed on the ground and from a perspective of operations, data and technology. So from the outside, people hear in-house and think it's a contract decision. Operationally, what changes made the biggest difference to your day-to-day once you brought that operation in-house?
There's quite a lot of things within there. On the biggest one that made the biggest impact overall and the biggest difference was the fixed rota that we introduced in a 4-day week. So in very simple terms, we've set out a 3-week working pattern with sort of what we refer to as compressed hours. So our normal shift would be 7 hours and 12 minutes, but we've compressed that to 9 hours. So effectively staff work the 5 days in 4. And then over a 3-week period, we have fixed dates. So all the staff have been assigned, this is your pattern, working pattern or a rota, and then that repeats every 3 weeks. What it helped us to achieve is very planned resource that we have on each date in each area, so we can then make appropriate plans as to what we can enforce, where we can enforce and how much. And then on the flip side, it gave the staff much better way to plan obviously their life and any leave they need to take. So it was just much more controlled way of how we can deliver. It obviously is less flexible to different needs, but obviously we can then just have overtime and etc. to meet that in some level, but that's where it helps us to plan. If we know we have big events coming up, then we know how many resources we're going to have on each date. Whereas previously, we used to run the operation with the contractor in a more flexible and adaptable way, but the level of resource did fluctuate on a day-by-day basis. So it was less predictable, which then just made planning much more of a headache, and there was too many moving parts to effectively plan like a year ahead in terms of resource and enforcement. So I think that's the biggest one that had a sort of an impact from a day to day. It's just that planning element on a fixed rota.
Can you give us an example of changes that improved things for, I guess, one, the officers that are in your employ, and then two, you've got some really neat case study data concerning the residents or the people who receive the notices of violation as well.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's building on from that fixed rota and a 4-day working week, which was a big welcome change for the officers. With that in mind, we also decided to assign specific areas for each team within Hackney. So what we've created is 3 districts. So effectively the whole borough was split into 3. We have the North, Central and South district, and the teams assigned within that, they stay in that location. The first rationale was to build a local knowledge. We have different communities within Hackney that have different needs. There are different restrictions. There are different parts of Hackney that have a bigger nighttime economy going on. There's so many different local issues or demands that when we had staff on rotation, that it was covering the whole of Hackney, it was quite difficult to maintain that local knowledge. So officers, in some extreme cases, have been going to areas where we had potentially gangs of a sort of illegal criminal activities that they haven't been aware of. We had higher numbers of physical and verbal attacks, which often just led to officers being, well, I didn't know this is going on in that area. And covering the whole borough is very difficult to remember for anyone, of all the little things that go on and the sensitivities or different events that are taking place. So we have decided to split into 3. The teams are assigned. They have the same area over and over. So they build that local knowledge. They know when problems are at different times of the days, etc. So that led to a huge reduction in physical and verbal attacks. It's pretty much like a 10-fold decrease on a year-on-year basis since we've done that. So
Wow.
it's been a huge for officers, and equally, that's the benefit from residents. And I think that's one of the key things we wanted to maintain, because residents often complain, oh, this vehicle is always here in the morning, or there is a local business that it's causing nuisance with the way they manage the vehicle activities. It was difficult to manage that on a long-term basis, with officers being on rota and some officers being there once and never coming back for 6 months, etc. So with the dedicated team, they've built a rapport with residents or businesses or other community organizations, and then could they plan a much more long-term action, sometimes maybe reviewing the parking restrictions we have in place, working with other teams like, Met Police, antisocial behaviour, etc., gangs team and so on, to resolve the root cause of the issue rather than just trying to fix it with putting a penalty charge notice on the car. That sometimes is a solution, but there are occasions where it wasn't. So for residents, the biggest benefit was that there was an ownership of some of the local problems and looking for a long-term solution from those residents and building that rapport off. Because usually that's for residents, that's the face of the council. That's the person who they see. And then often their actions and their interactions is what forms the opinion about the council. That's the sort of approach we took, and it has worked with many benefits on both sides. But I think, for officers, knowing what the situation is and the location helps to manage any potential risks. And for residents, they get that ongoing support that they don't have to explain again and again the same problem they've been having because the officers already know it.
Yeah, that awareness is critical. Full transparency, I formerly managed parking compliance in Chicago, and I currently manage a data science team. So your data story really resonates with me. What data do you rely on the most to run an effective enforcement program in Hackney? And I guess the second part of that question would be, is there any data that you avoid giving too much weight to or too much consideration?
I think, we do the normal sort of activity levels of how many visits, how many vehicles, and how many tickets, all of that. That's a sort of standard data that we do. But that's where I think we moved away from taking that as the core of what we use for decision making. We have the 3 sort of main ones. So complaints. So this is where we receive complaints from residents, and that sort of is the main measure. The less complaints we get, I think the better job we do in an enforcement, because that means we proactively resolved those issues to escalate to a complaint. And then within that is measuring repeated complaints. So are we getting complaints about the same thing over and over? And the more we do, the more investigation needs to be put into that side of things. Then I think, as you mentioned at the start, our appeals rate and how we rank overall in the tribunals, that is our ultimate test of our activities in terms of fairness, legalities, etc. So that any cases where we lose and where we win are reviewed by the team to see where we can have lessons learned. So that feeds in to all the way down to officer on the street to know how those cases go at the tribunal and what has been found, what was good, what was bad. So it's a both positive feedback and a constructive criticism of any areas where we can improve. And then I think lastly with all of these is monitoring the trends. So the trends for us is more important than the overall level of activities on a sort of weekly or monthly basis, is comparing that to what it was. If we look at December, how does it compare to the last year, December? We have a more sort of like for like comparison. Is it more? Is it less? And then in what areas? But I think, fundamentally, the complaints as a way of where is a problem, and then appeals as our sort of quality measure to know that our enforcement is still up to the highest standard that it possibly can.
And Jade, I think Michael's being a little bit modest here with these numbers. Number one, correct, in terms of cases going in the council's favor?
Yes, for a few years we were. I think we ranked number 2 in the last year. So we are still in the top 3. So we finally got some competition from other councils by a tiny margin. So we are working to get back up there. But we consistently for many years in top 3, many times number 1. And it's good to see other councils catching up, and we having finally, good competitions and lessons learned equally across the sector. So that's very good to see.
Amazing.
Raising the bar, that's what you're doing there at Hackney, Michael, is raising the bar. And it's that consistent 360 self-awareness and review of your own quality and impact that you have on the people and residents of Hackney that makes it such a customer forward-facing borough. And, the experience is only going to be better for those end users for it. I'm interested to understand, is there any data that you feel should be helping you more than it currently is? And if so, what would you most like to bring together to see more clearly?
I think generally it's all data. The key part for us where we lack in is just knowing what other councils, for example, do. So like vehicle activities, especially with the most sort of persistent evaders, what we know is only what happens in Hackney. Are those vehicles also contravening in neighbouring councils? Are they also potentially a persistent evader there? And also the sort of data, the limited data that we currently get on the actual vehicle when it comes to maybe insurance status, which we don't have access to, MOT, and all the other markers for potential vehicle activities and likelihood for offending is what we would love to see. And we have quite limited, so it's always just a local data set that we work with. And then often vehicles need to offend multiple times, contravene multiple times before they actually flagged as a nuisance or problematic vehicle that we need to take stronger enforcement action. If we had access to some sort of industry shared data, I know there are some initiatives out there that are starting to work towards that. So it's definitely one that I would like to see being explored, where we have a bit more shared intel, shared knowledge that would benefit everyone to do a better job. And then also for residents and drivers is to, take the most persistent offenders who have no respect for the rules, take away, remove the vehicle, etc., take stronger enforcement action. So it protects the valuable space, the limited space we have in big cities for all those users, to go on about their business and with their day-to-day lives. I think it's just knowing more so we can then take better action when it comes to enforcement.
Knowledge is power, right? And I think, Matt, you would agree with that wholeheartedly, being a data man, that being able to see the bigger picture and how it can impact you and be able to foresee some challenges potentially before they happen could be such a strong tool for authorities.
Oh, yeah.
And you're quite in a unique situation as well, Michael, being in a London borough where you've got quite a high pressure all around you, as well as in your own space. You've got boroughs around you which are also very highly congested, limited space around them too. And when you're looking at the borough boundary being a difference between one street to the next, if you have somebody who is consistently flouting parking restrictions and getting multiple parking charges without that deterrent actually taking place, then having that knowledge and that ability to foresee it would be quite powerful for you to be able to take appropriate action quicker to protect that very valued space. On the technology side, what kind of tools or systems have genuinely improved effectiveness or fairness? Now, you've got loads of tools there, handhelds for evidence capture, case management, processing tools, permits, ANPR dashboards. What's actually moved the needle out of all those and made the biggest impact?
In my experience in Hackney was the body-worn video badges. So we've got a policy where officers need to record every time they take enforcement action, every time they have interaction with members of the public. The body-worn video badges we have also sort of pre-record. So if there is incident, it goes back, I think, 30 seconds or sort of a minute, depending on the settings we've got. And that obviously creates a lot of video for us. But when we do get complaints or there is an investigation case or there is a dispute against the parking charge, etc., that video evidence makes sure the officer behaved in the most professional and fair manner. We have the interactions from the customer. It all is a clear evidence. And I think that also makes the officers more aware it is being recorded. So I need to be on my best behavior. So it's always a good self-regulating tool. And for customers, if they know that it's being recorded, it hopefully leads to a better behavior from drivers as well. It's never nice to receive a parking ticket. It does bring a bit of emotion. So I think knowing that it's being recorded, it helps to de-escalate situation. Not always, and in the extreme cases, we do have then the right evidence to potentially, criminal prosecution. It helps with our independent adjudicators because we use that in evidence as well. When someone claims they've been told something by an officer, we have the video to say that wasn't the case. And if there was, a potential situation where not the correct information is given, we can capture that at the very first stage of the appeals process and cancel the fine if we made a mistake or something was given wrong or a sign was missing or any situations like that. So we've got the evidence to see exactly what happened. So that made the biggest difference in terms of fairness and customer service and our quality the most out of all the tech bits that we've got going on.
It's a huge impact. I know in the States, in Indianapolis, they saw something like a 40% reduction in negative interactions with the public through the use of body-worn cameras. I think you raised a really good point. How much of that reduction is related to maybe a little bit more self-regulation? That's an excellent point. It's not just the customer, right? I have a similar question, a little change, but in terms of technologies or process changes, have you seen any that have improved efficiency or sped up the decision-making process in the back office?
Yeah, I think the digitalization of a lot of data that we have is making the biggest one. So having all in one place. And I think you mentioned, knowledge is power. It's also having the right access to the knowledge for officers straight away. Going back a few years back when we had pocket books that it's all handwritten by an officer and then needs to be scanned. And when the officer is reviewing it, there's quite a lot of reading or sometimes deciphering what that handwriting is and what it means. And then sometimes it goes through pages. So I think now with all the digital tools, digital notes, photos, traffic management orders, all the other permits, all being digital in one place, quite easy to search and then verify with history of events to see when someone applied and was it someone applied just right after they received the parking ticket and then wanted to explain they've already had a permit, that's why we should cancel. So all of that data being in one place is just more accessible to make those decisions. I think it's not some specific tool that made it happen. It's all just the modern systems that we start to get that's benefit from a lot more digitalization.
It's that ability to link all those different pockets of information and cross-reference them, isn't it? Because you've got your permit applications, you've got your traffic regulation orders, which is your curbside rules, and actually what's on the road, the restrictions, as well as what the driver's telling you, what the civil enforcement officer has reported as a contravention, and being able to pull all those things together in one place to say, okay, here's the bigger picture, without having to cross-reference several physical items is so important because it saves so much time. It saves time. It means that your response is clearer. It's more effective. And also it enables you to then look back historically and then cross-reference where things can be improved. So equally, it's just as much of a quality assurance tool as it is that ability to maintain a streamlined operation.
Well, we've talked about what's worked in Hackney. Let's zoom out to an industry level. Adopting new technology in local authorities can certainly be a journey. What helps councils adopt those new technologies? And what are the impediments? What slows it down?
A journey is one way of putting it. In local government, it's, we operate under very heavily regulated environment. There's a lot of scrutiny. There's a lot of levels of governance, both on corporate side, on the political side. So the options to try out new things is often quite limited. And within how it's all set out is usually quite risk averse. We do try to experiment and encourage that to happen, but I think that's usually all of those processes, checks and balances, etc. That's what slows it down because of various reasons. There's a lot of processes in place for all the right reasons to make sure taxpayers' money is not being wasted on some research and development that sort of never brings any positive results to the organization. But that's what slows it down, is we often wait for different parts of other industries to test things, and we only start coming in once it's mature and ready to go. I think in parking, it's usually that's the reason why it lags sometimes so much in comparison to other industries that are much more evolving, because of those processes and things we need to do, due diligence before we implement something. But I think, there is a strong appetite from many councils to test things. And then it's just working with suppliers to do that in a controlled way within all the sort of checks and balances that we need to maintain across the board for, public interest tests, etc.
Now, Michael, I'm going to hand you a tool that was developed in our first season, and it's called the Magic Wand. And for listeners who haven't heard that particular podcast, go back to season 1, our episode with Julie Dixon, where the magic wand came out. Now, Michael, the magic wand is something that we can give to you, and you have the freedom to say whatever it is that you need, in a perfect world, what that would be to help you, right? So from what I would like to know is, I've given you the magic wand. If you could build your ideal technology stack from scratch, what are the 2 or 3 top things that you would make sure are included, and why?
So I think the very first one would be to make that one system or platform, however you want to call it, just being used by all authorities. And that would then help that sort of data knowledge sharing, or some sort of central way standards that all systems work towards, that they can talk to each other. That would be number one. So it helps with knowledge sharing, it helps with fraud prevention. It would also help in many cases the resident, the customer, to not having to fill out the same information over and over again, because it's already there. So like one central account for everything to use, and then same for local authorities, one tool to use. And the next one would be the sort of flexibility, customization that's sort of already designed as part of it. A lot of systems need to be tailored, need to be modified, which then takes away of how it was originally structured. So it makes sometimes more complicated to build as it was, because I think a lot of obviously platforms are built for specific purpose. And then as it comes with councils and governments, and especially local government, there are local policies, local rules that are quite often are contrasting even in surrounding councils, that then makes it difficult for the suppliers and then from the councils to sort of bespoke it. So I think from the very design ground up is to make it that you can customize it and tweak it as you see fit, and all the workflows and processes are robust to take into account these type of variations. So I think that's the biggest two, and I think the third one would lead on obviously taking advantage of all the latest machine learning, AI, automation to make things much quicker to work through and decipher and sort of process those vast numbers of data that we have through the enforcement, especially as it accumulates over years and years, to see trend patterns, analysis, and look more at predicting and forecasting what can happen. So that would be my sort of top three.
Jade, I feel like we almost need to insert like a Harry Potter command, like Nalegio Sheriamus or something, right?
I love that. Yeah, let's do that. I think that's definitely a note. It's a note for the producers to chuck that in. And also, Michael, I think you got your money's worth out of that wand as well. That was some impressive requests you had. It's almost like you thought about it before.
Well, it's I can keep on wishing for things like that to happen. Not to say you ever will, but yeah, we can keep on dreaming, I guess.
You never know, Michael. Matt's a data science man, by the way. So, he's not just a data man, he's a data science man. So all of these kind of things are music to his ears. And I'm sure all the tools you've just outlined will also be very welcomed over in the States as well. So very insightful. And I think it's a great segue as well to think about, like, from your perspective, where do you think technology will generally benefit the sector most over the next few years? So let's do a bit of future gazing and have a look about where it's going.
Well, I think that's as everything is the hot topic of AI and sort of automation and having that sort of more data being processed. So I guess, when it comes to cases like in parking, because of the volumes we deal with, there is so much data, and making sure there is a consistency across all the responses by different officers and often very similar cases. The sort of AI tools, that would be, I think, the next step where it needs to go. With that being said, touching on to the previous point, it is the local government. We have a lot of checks to make sure that technology doesn't disadvantage anyone. We can have computer says no type of situation. So it needs to be much more tested and overseen still by a human, because they're often in parking disputes and appeals, there is that element of discretion. And it's very difficult to have a computer define that. It's easy to follow certain rules or policies, whether it happened. But then there are mitigating circumstances. There are different things that happen in people's life and where more sort of lenient approach needs to be taken to those rules, which I think in most cases can only be done by an officer. And legally, in many cases, it must be done by a council officer. So the tools there to help them process loads of data, make sure the response is consistently written. And I think that's where the automation and AI will really help. But I think that the human in the loop needs to stay for, going future, even if the regulations do change. But that's an element that the human touch, I think, so to speak, to make sure people get the fair outcome based on the circumstances that led to them in parking and contravention. Sometimes there are genuine reasons that warrant a cancellation of a PCN. So I think that's in that sort of prism or that sort of angle of viewing these things. It's definitely AI and automation, but it's also trying to balance it out with making sure we've got that sensitive approach to managing the overall enforcement, and it's not zeros and ones in the outcome.
Yeah, that element of, I guess in the States, we call it prosecutorial discretion, right? That's got to be something that is owned by humans going forward. That's a great point. We've heard your wishes concerning tech stacks and the future of technology. I'm wondering from a supplier and vendor perspective, what is it that you wish they understood better about the operational constraints of government?
Very good question. And I think the one that comes often from various conversations is the procurement regulations and the governance. I think a lot of suppliers don't really understand how a local authority buys products. So I guess it's doing a bit of research in that and understanding the processes, which are often lengthy, bureaucratic. There are multiple valid reasons for it to make sure taxpayers' money is spent efficiently and properly with no unwanted bribery, etc., and things like that. So there are reasons for it, but it's also understanding how regulated framework of procurement that is. Because often we get suppliers, well, we've got this amazing product, why don't you get it? We can't just go and get it. And I think that often leads to a bit of frustration. Or why is it taking so long? We've been waiting for 3 months, and there are governance steps. There are, various committees, various stakeholders that need to sign things off. Often these committees only meet on monthly basis. So if you missed a deadline this month, you need to wait another month. And the political side of things as well. I think that's what often is not understood. In UK, we have local elections coming up. We soon enter in pre-election period. Most bigger decisions, councils don't make. So everything goes on hold for that period of time. And when it comes to bigger changes and bigger decisions, key decisions, that's all on hold until the elections are over. So that's, I think, I would say for all suppliers is the information is there. It's all in public domain on how it works. It's sometimes just having a bit of read and trying to understand that there is another dimension of things local authority officers need to go through. And it's not as simple, we like this company the most, or that's the best product, we can just go in and take that. There are processes and other procedures to follow. So I think it's just being mindful of that. And I think also going back to the point where the creativity and testing is seeing how solutions can be offered within trials under existing contracts or other, where that's where the areas to experiment and trial things can be done. So that's, I think, would be my polite request to all suppliers. Check a bit on procurement and go, I know it's boring, and if you got problems falling asleep, that I guarantee that will do the trick.
A bit of welcome nighttime reading.
Yes.
Michael, before we wrap up, I know something that you're quite passionate about as well. There's one particular topic that we can't ignore, and that's the public perception piece. How do you build public trust in enforcement, and how can data and technology help without making it feel like a surveillance operation?
Yeah, it's a very important aspect when it comes to enforcement, especially, and delivering, parking transport services. I think from where we come from, it is fairness, consistency, transparency. I think that's the sort of 3 themes I would classify it as. With fairness and consistency, that obviously comes to enforcement action, making sure we enforce the rules in the same way, consistently, not having any bespoke rules being applied by different officers. So it's making sure that training is there. And then transparency is where we want to, as much as we possibly can within the constraints of data protection and all the other bits that we've got to follow. For example, as in Hackney, we have what we call as a PCN data hub. So it's a public-facing portal where you can go and find any street, any time period, and see how much enforcement activities we did. Helps answering a lot of freedom of information requests where, how many fines did you issue last year on this street? We can just point everyone. You can have a read, there's nothing that we've got to hide. It's all there. Have a look. Even for residents looking how often the street is patrolled and how many contraventions happen, they can see that. To journalists writing a piece of how much enforcement we've carried out in the last year or comparing to previous year, it's all there. So where we can, we're trying to put that data out to be transparent. A lot of our policies are out there on how we enforce what we do. So we're trying to keep that. And I think that's where it's just building that trust. The more transparent we are, the more people trust in what we do. And that's how we maintain with everything that we possibly can.
It sounds like such a simple thing to do, but actually the impact of it is quite big. And, that's such an ethical and, like you say, transparent way of being able to just open the door to people living and working within Hackney to say, okay, I don't understand the rules, or what's the situation here? Why am I seeing an increase in activity, for example? And, not just that transparency element of it as well, but also reducing operational lift when it comes to things like FOI requests and data from media, etc. So that's a great way to do it. And actually, it's a great example to set as well. I would like to hear more examples of boroughs working like that and authorities working like that in that transparent way. Now, we're going to wrap up on a bit of a quick fire. So we've knocked around the industry for a while, Michael, and we've grown within it, I think. What's one piece of advice for someone that you would give that's starting in public service?
I think it's going to be patience. Just be patient. Things in government never happens quick. So I think that sometimes, and don't get in a way with what you want to achieve, is just, be persistent, just keep going and be patient for things to happen. And when they do happen is where you see the result. I think sometimes, especially when people switch from a private sector into the government sector, initially they want things to happen tomorrow, and it's like, yeah, let's get this contractor, let's do this, let's make that change. And it's not as simple and not as quick as that. There are quite a few wheels that need to turn at its specific pace. I think, yeah, it's be patient, but still be, keep pushing for what you want to achieve, and then, yeah, play the long game. Maybe is the other way to put it in local government. So yeah, I think that's the first thing I wish someone told me when I started.
It's a grind in government. It really is. You have so many bosses in government. People don't really realize that. What's one trend you're really excited about? And maybe conversely, a technology you're a little skeptical of?
I think that's going to go back to what pretty much is in the technology term is the AI. It's obviously one of the very excited, sometimes seeing what it potentially can do, sometimes being quite disappointed when it gets it terribly wrong. And then I think that's the skepticism of it's quite early technology. There is a lot of things we need to test out and see. So for both is the same thing. And I think that's across probably the world of seeing how that technology evolves and how it can benefit us. The potential benefits and changes that it will bring is huge, but also equally there are huge risks associated with it, which I think we touched upon earlier, especially with that sort of discretionary powers that apply, is how we as an enforcement industry will make sure it's fair and consistent rather than just more effective or more quick or automated. And I can just potentially see how bad for the industry would be where AI would hallucinate and send some fines that never happened. That would be disastrous for, the reputation of the industry. So I think that's where it's very cautious before we deploy anything within the enforcement realm of AI. But there are tools that can help us just to make better decisions quicker. So in both ways, it's going to be the artificial intelligence that it's rapidly evolving and keeping a close eye how it can help in the enforcement sector.
Yeah, agreed. So much promise, but that black box decision-making is still a little worrisome. Well, Michael, thank you so much. This has been fantastic, really helpful and also very honest.
Yeah, Michael, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for having the conversation with us, and not only for you joining us, but for the work your team do and what you do as well, because it's one of those services where people only really notice it when it's not working.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, follow Parking Live, leave a rating, and share it with someone who secretly loves a good curbside conversation.
We all know one person at least. At least. That's a challenge for you. Gauntlet down. Thanks everyone for joining. See you next time.
Thank you for listening. I'm Julie Gates, executive producer of Parking Live. This episode was created by hosts and producers Jade, Neville, and Matt Darst, producer Chris O'Keefe, editor Patrick Emile, and associate producer Cindy Raskin. Parking Live is brought to you by Modaxo, passionate about moving the world's people. You can follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and visit us online at parking-live.com. Thanks for joining us at Parking Live, where the curb meets the conversation.